Do you have any money?
I have $400.
Yes, like $250 plus over $2,000 in college account stuff.
What do you do with your money? How do you save it?
In a money saving jar. And it's like a mini game.
I keep my cash in a money box in my room, but I lost the key, so I don't know where that went. And then I keep my big money that I get from acting jobs and stuff. I keep that, I guess, in a bank, in a college account.
Is there anything that you're saving for?
Yes, I'm saving for the biggest slime ever.
Going places with my friends.
Do you think allowance that you get or money that you're getting, do you think that should be taxed?
What even is tax?
No, I think I should get interest on it.
Do you think it's something that the government or mommy or daddy or grandma should keep, we should keep a percentage?
Of tax?
Like a tax, like a parent tax?
Yes.
What if we took 10%?
You should upgrade it to 20%.
Hey Ambassadors, I'm Masela Chabibi. Some people call me Selly. If you've ever been to the grocery store, if you've ever paid for childcare, if you've ever managed a family budget, congratulations, because you've actually been participating in the economy. As consumers, our spending actually makes up about 2/3 of the entire US economy, which blows my mind. So in other words, our everyday family spending patterns make up the backbone of all economic activity. And our household budgets reflect overall economic health. So when we make choices about what we can afford, what we can't afford, we're actually responding to broader economic forces like inflation, like tariffs, like government policies. So personal budgeting is actually a micro reflection of macroeconomic conditions. What I'm trying to say is the economy and our spending habits are not just some distant, abstract system. It's all woven in to our daily lives. And if you've ever felt like no matter how hard you've tried to work, the system still seems stacked against you. I know in my case, when I'm thinking of childcare, when I'm thinking of summer vacations, when I'm thinking of signing up for summer camps, these are all real things that in some situations, it feels like the money is not adding up. Or in other seasons, it may feel like it's overflowing. But if you have those feelings, you're definitely not alone, and you're exactly in the right place. My guest this week is economist Kathryn Edwards. She's here to break it all down for us without the jargon, without the big words, and really connect the dots between policy, parenting, everyday life, and show us why change is actually possible. She's also a great follow on TikTok and Instagram, and so she's one that I welcome into my algorithm. As always, we'll start with a personal story because when we talk about policy, we're really talking about people. So Ambassadors, I'm taking you back in time to my junior year of college. I had the opportunity to study abroad in Switzerland, and I signed up to take an economics class. And I walk in and I'm greeted by this adorable, petite Italian man, Professor Andrea Terzi. And little did I know that I was about to embark on a journey that made the economy and economics more broadly come to life. He really had a way of transforming these big concepts and theories into ways that were relatable to our everyday life. That all inspired me to really lean in and learn more. That class stayed with me because it made one thing crystal clear. The economy isn't an abstract machine. It's a reflection of real people, real lives, our lives. And I'm happy to report I got a B+ in the class, which didn't entirely drop my overall GPA. And that's exactly the spirit we're bringing to today's conversation. Because when we can see how these systems touch us, we can start to imagine how to make them better. Kathryn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're just going to jump right in. When we hear people talk about the economy, it often feels like a big abstract force that shapes our lives, but is really, hard to wrap our head around. I know, honestly, for me, I get it. It's overwhelming, even though I may have interest. And so, when we think about how something as intangible as the economy really impacts something as real and personal as our children's lives and our lives, how can we break it all down in a way that actually makes sense? How do we connect the dots between these big economic concepts and everyday decisions we make for our families and children?
That's a great question. And I think it's worth saying two things. One is that you have to do right by your family. That's the North Star. And that involves a lot of decision making, some of which will be economic in nature and some of it won't. But that's always what you should be doing, is doing right by your family. Our economy is sometimes described as being like the weather, where it just seems like it's something that's happening to you but out of your control. And that's not accurate. There are lots of ways in which the economy and the sum total of all those economic decisions and priorities that families are making is stronger or weaker based on both how the economy is doing and the policy built to support it. So what I would tell people is sometimes when you're making a decision for your family and it feels like you're running against a brick wall, that is often a policy failure that you don't have the words to describe or the expertise to identify, but it's the result of a choice we make about our economy, not a function of living in one.
And just to follow up on that, can you give our listeners like an example? Like what came to my mind was like purchasing a home and having enough money for a down payment.
That's a good one. The one that I bring up a lot with parents is childcare.
Amen.
The private provision of childcare is a market failure. We currently buy care, right? Someone sells it, we buy it. They don't make enough of it. It's not high quality enough, and it's too expensive. So the private provision of childcare is a market failure because it doesn't meet the demand that the economy requires at the price the economy requires. So this is an area in which, if there's a clear market failure, that tends to set the boundaries for government intervention. I'm a person in the world, and it doesn't matter how hard I try, I can't fix the broken childcare market. I might be able to out-earn it, but I'll never fix it. I'll never change it. It's beyond the scope of my individual behavior. And yet it's hurting a lot of families. That slides it from this is something that happens in a market in the economy, and it just kind of moves it on over to this is something the government should address. They've failed to address it. That's a policy choice. So it feels like your money doesn't go far enough. It feels like you're putting some undue burden on your family just because you want to work. When in actuality, your policymakers have failed to address a market that has been in failure for 30 years that has absolutely no hope of ever turning itself around.
Thank you so much, because with someone that has 3 children, that's a very tangible example. Kathryn, what I love about you, and I'm going to get to a quote that you cite often, is you make this whole subject just very approachable, which, I really appreciate. But you say many people in economics communicate in a way to show how smart they are. But I like to communicate to show how smart you are. You in this conversation, I think, would mean me. And so, we know that economics is big, it's nuanced, and there's never one single right answer, but it's not hard. What are we not understanding about economics, and what could make this easier?
I think what people get most wrong about the economy is that hardship is a necessity, that inequality is a necessity, that there's no other option except for the state of the world we have, as opposed to, like, the economy is a ball of clay. It can be shaped to our will. If you don't like the way that it's shaped, it's because someone else has it in their hands. There's no rule that says the only way a $20 trillion economy can function is if the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. There's no rule that says that. So what I try to, kind of impress upon people when talking about the economy is that we often get told things as if they're facts, when in fact they're choices. I'm like, well, minimum wage causes job loss. That's, very hard to prove. And frankly, there's so much economic discourse is just about kind of like gaslighting people with the objections they have. Like, well, you just don't know that the economy has to work that way. Telling people that their own lived experiences are not in line with like what the economy says is right or what economists say is necessary. So Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answered your question. I think it's just that the economy can be working better for people, but there's this disconnect between I know what's wrong in my life, but I can't diagnose what's wrong in a $20 trillion economy. And I just want to try and bridge that gap to say the things that you know from your life, they point to problems that economists can see in the overall US economy, and the bridge is there. You might not be able to talk about it, but that's not because you're not smart enough. It's because people are withholding information from you. You can get this. Like, believe it or not, you having a hard time buying childcare is equivalent to a nationwide problem where lots of families are having a hard time buying childcare. It makes it very hard for people to have either high quality care or maintain care and not drop out of the labor market. And both of those have massive deleterious consequences on our economy. That kids are unprepared for kindergarten on one hand, or women drop out of the labor market and we lose workers in the economy on the other. Like, childcare is hard. I'm the economist telling you that hard penalizes our economy, and I'm trying to bridge these two things together.
And so to follow up on that, at First Focus, early childhood is a big part of our work. And so we advocate for, at one point, when it was part of the conversation, universal pre-K. And as someone that used to live in Washington, D.C., now lives in Maryland, D.C. has universal pre-K. And so I was able to benefit from that program, a policy decision, right, that then impacted my pocketbook significantly. And so just for our listeners, are those the types of policy choices that you're talking about?
Oh, and they're myriad. I mean, childcare is an example because it's a high price tag. But we also, in the U.S., have chosen not to have paid family leave, paid medical leave. We don't even have the requirement for paid sick days. In a lot of countries that are our peers who have just as good an economy as we do, they have the right to work part-time and request flexible arrangements, especially while their kids are young. They're more inclusive of getting people with a disability or long-term illness to get into their economy because they can get flexible work arrangements. All of these are choices. And you can feel it in your own life, but the economy feels it too. And I think what I try to stress on one level is we could have a better economy if you were doing better. There's always this false trade-off of like, well, I know it's really hard for you to get childcare, but like the economy is strong and like this is just a price we have to pay for living in a strong, successful economy. And that is unequivocally not true. At the end of the day, the economy itself is just a number. It's a big number that describes how much output we have. It doesn't tell you how many people are poor. It doesn't tell you how easy it is to raise a kid. It doesn't tell you how much economic security there is or how confident people feel in their own, economic lives. But just because it doesn't tell you that doesn't mean it's unaffected by those things. And that economic insecurity or people having a hard time raising their kids, that doesn't mean that doesn't show up in that number. It just doesn't show up in the way that maybe you would think. It shows up by having lower incomes, lower earnings, lower potential for your labor force participation and lifetime earnings. It shows up in numbers even if you feel it.
I want listeners to hear this, but it's already coming through. My next question to you is, why did you decide to go beyond your research onto platforms like TikTok to begin talking about, the economy?
5 years ago, I was invisible. No one could have found me even if they had my name to look up. I was very much like a head down working as an economist for a think tank that does a lot of policy problem solving. But I have an area of expertise within economics, which is unemployment and recessions. So when the pandemic recession started, I was in a position to be not only an expert about something, but I just didn't look like the other experts there were. I mean, unemployment insurance is a very important public program that does not have a huge expert or advocacy base. And a lot of the people who are experts and advocates they're older, they're men, they might not have PhDs. And so, I ended up having this like debutante ball to the media world because I was a female with a PhD under 40 who could speak with incredible clarity about what was going on in unemployment and the recession. And it's just, you can't put that back in the box. Media hits turned into blog post turned into columns turned into an offered column position and podcast requests. And it kept going. And sometimes your career is something that you sit down and design. And sometimes it takes a turn and you can either chase the butterfly down the hallway or close the door and say, that's not for me. And so I've been chasing it.
And continue to chase because you're very talented at what you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What has been the most surprising aspect of doing this work on social? Like, I'm sure you've come across nuggets or pockets that just totally surprised you.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of, social media is exhausting, I will say, because you have to put vertical content on all the vertical content platforms. It's a lot of working in like triplicate of like, I made this video for TikTok and now I need to post it for Instagram and now I need to post it to YouTube. I put out this tweet, but now I need to make sure it's on Blue Sky and Threads. And so it's a lot of like, basically like replicating yourself so you're accessible to every audience. And then on top of this, I still have like a very staid classic newspaper column in which I write about the economy. I think what has surprised me, I've been delighted by the comments section. I normally just get really nice comments. They're hilarious a lot of the time. Sometimes I joke with my, especially on TikTok, I'll be like, man, you guys are to the left of Lenin, my little communist out there. It's just, people really show themselves in this. And I think I was not expecting a conversation. And I definitely got a conversation. And there's trolls, there's awful people. I have a PhD in economics and I'm a woman speaking. The most common comment I'll get is, I'm stupid and I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's just the casual undercutting of my ability to speak with authority is just a permanent part of being an intelligent woman interacting in a public space. But the connections I've made and the conversations I have, not just some trolly comment that some guy makes. Also, my followers don't really like when that happens, and so they will rise to my defense. But I've been so surprised by the conversations I've had, and it has opened my eyes in many ways to just how much people want to understand why it's so hard. I also get the sense that people are really tired of talking points and just the hollowness there are to these nice phrases that don't tell you anything, but they're like designed to make sure that they poll well. The children are our future. And that's what you'll hear from every politician of like, we just want what's best for families. But really what families want is for someone to explain to them how the market failure of childcare will be addressed in time for them to have a third kid. And so I think I'm filling a gap that has been left by a lot of leadership in our country to talk beneath people or around people, as opposed to talking to people about problems and assuming that they can't understand it.
Right. Can't understand it and can't fix it. Let's hold it right there for a second. Okay, ambassadors, we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, Kathryn takes off her economics hat and puts on her mom hat, and things get personal. We talk about what it really means to raise a kid in this economy, what the American dream asks of our 5-year-olds. Yes, 5-year-olds. And why maybe, just maybe, we haven't failed yet, because we haven't really tried. Stay with us. Kathryn, I've been thinking, at what point in your career did you realize that kids, women, families were really at the intersection of labor and equity and just the economy at large?
I won't lie, having my own children, made this much more palpable than it was before. I came up as a researcher studying poverty. And when I was in graduate school, I had a poverty research fellowship, and studying and understanding poverty in the United States is inextricably linked to children. They are the poorest group of Americans, and kids under 5 are poorer than kids 6 to 18. And the kind of truisms that emerge about poverty in the United States they're so linked to childhood. But there was a perspective shift when I became a parent. Like, I am a force of nature in trying to make sure my kids are doing okay in the world. It is only through that first person experience that I'm like, man, so how does someone do this when they're not rich? How does someone do this when they don't have a partner that also has a high paying job? How does someone do this if they don't speak to their family because they're gay and their family has completely cut them off? Like, how do you do this if you are not amongst the fortunate few? And I can know that in the data and know that from studying poverty, but knowing it the way a mom knows it, it's just different.
Yeah. When I started at First Focus on children, I wasn't a mom. And so I'm in your camp, right? Like my background is something that, I can work in a lot of different industries to a degree. And I was like, oh, okay, this will be nice for a few years. But then when I became a mom, your whole world changes.
Yeah, I think that perspective changes and the statistics hit different. So I think the greatest measure of failure in the US economy and US public policy is the gap in school readiness for 5-year-olds entering kindergarten. I mean, they're 5. I understand that we want people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but that is a lot to put on a 5-year-old. And the gaps are there. I mean, they're there in, school readiness. They're there in reading. They're there in like literacy, numeracy. They're there in childhood obesity. They're there in childhood nutrition. I mean, the gaping inequality between rich and poor in the United States is imprinted on children by the time they show up to public school at age 5. That is something I knew before I had kids, and then I learned again after I had kids. And I knew it, and then I learned it. And it was so harrowing to think how many people know it, but haven't learned it.
Or felt it.
Because
ultimately, at the end of the day, and this focus is on the economy and not other things right now, but as a mom, you're focused on giving your child the best outcome. But I think once you quickly realize that what's the best outcome for your child is also what's in the best interest of the country and ultimately the world, and then there are solutions, you just kind of wonder, well, what's the problem?
What's the problem? I mean, one thing I've talked about before is the American dream and this kind of perennial navel gaze that we have in this country of wondering if the dream is dead. And the conclusion that I've come to is that we don't have the American dream because we don't want it. And if we wanted the American dream, we would be alarmed by the fact that inequality has cemented the difference between rich and poor by age 5. And if we seem untroubled by that, it's because we actually don't want the American dream. I mean, it doesn't start at age 18. Especially if you've already been cemented by age 5. I mean, I don't mean cemented like people are fated or they can never overcome certain circumstances, but they shouldn't have to overcome so much at age 5, right? It's not to say that there's not a 5-year-old who's bright, who wasn't ready in kindergarten, but is able to, catch up and do really well. It's just that certain 5-year-olds are forced to catch up because of the failures in our economy and public policy. Imagine the world we would have if they didn't have to catch up, if they just got to sprint ahead. That would be the American dream. So I tell people, it's not dead. You don't want it. And until you are scandalized by someone else's kid having less money or preparation than yours, you don't want the American dream either. This is the only part, I think, of my public facing rhetoric in which I think I actually do get kind of nasty. Because I think people like to believe the best in themselves always. And I'd like to believe the best in people always as well. But the callous treatment of children whose parents you don't like reveals something nasty about ourselves. And I think people don't want to believe that about their own self.
I think that's accurate.
That's the harsh version. I think that a lot of people, that's a lot to put on their shoulders too. I'm able to see both sides. Hey, if you're not fighting for the poor neighbor next door's kid, who are you? But at the same time, it shouldn't be your problem. It should be policymakers are fixing this so it doesn't become an individual burden. And I think, again, this goes back to the rhetoric I try to push through and the communication around the economy is that, an economy as unequal as the one that we have, with as many failures as the one that we have, it makes villains out of us all. What we should be focusing our attention to is where policy has failed those kids. I think where I see kind of this wedge is the people who don't support that policy. It's one thing for there to be public policy failures related to the underinvestment in children and the inequality that children experience, but it's another thing to have someone stare me down in a TikTok video and say, it's not my job to pay for somebody else's kids.
Which is equally accurate, right? So you're balancing that. But at the end of the day, it comes back to exactly what you said is these are policy level decisions. And it shouldn't get to the point where, we're pitted against each other. Because I also think a piece of this is people always not understanding the broader context and where they sit. So it's easier for them to throw that out in a nuanced way without fully understanding Okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, like you're allowed to feel that way, but like, well, what does that then mean, right?
I mean, it's all a two-way street
Yeah.
where policy fails and where people's individual views are. And policy might not reflect the things that we want, but it doesn't necessarily not reflect the things that we think. I guess is another way to think about it. Like there's lots of problems with the way our public policy is structured, but at the same time, like there are clear veins of it reflecting a mindset that maybe isn't shared, but it certainly exists. So I think one explanation for how I think about this is that I study unemployment. And that's actually what I wrote my dissertation on, was on unemployment. And I have always felt so, in some ways, whipsawed by just how cruel someone will casually be to an unemployed person. I mean, 6 weeks ago, this was someone who had a job, who worked hard, who was doing what they were supposed to do in the economy. They get laid off and they're lazy. They don't want to work. They're just takers. They're living off the dole. They won't take jobs unless it has a better benefit. The casual fall from grace that is so steep, but so quick, of you used to be a good, hard American worker and now you're unemployed and you're nothing. I've sat in that designation for a while. I've let that rhetoric sit in my head for a while to try to understand where it comes from. And the conclusion I came to, especially in the pandemic, is that it's a self-preservation. If a hardworking person who didn't do anything wrong can end up unemployed, that means I could be unemployed. And so the more that I kind of denigrate unemployed people, the more I make them different from myself. And it's just a self-preservation of hardworking people who had good jobs don't become unemployed. Otherwise, I could be like that. So it's easier to think well, they didn't work that hard, or they took the wrong job, or they made some mistake on the way that explains why they're unemployed. And I didn't make that mistake, which explains why I'm not. And the randomness of unemployment is really hard for people to get their heads around. So that type of I don't want to be kind to the unemployed because it would reveal that I myself am vulnerable to unemployment. I think I see some of that with how we think about child policy and how we think about investments in children and investments in families, that part of it is just the self-preservation mindset projected onto a group of people that need help that you don't want to help.
I love the way that you broke it down because it really makes sense and it's exactly how I feel. And I think that you just articulated it in a way that's even more relatable. And so to keep the conversation going, what in all of this gives you hope?
Hope? Oh my God, y'all, the hope comes from trying nothing so far. Right? If we were at the end of a 30-year policy sprint where we threw everything in the kitchen sink at child poverty, at inequality, at economic mobility, at the cost of having kids or health insurance or anything, I would be like, man, I don't know what's left. This is really tough. We have in fact tried almost nothing. We've tried so little, it rounds down to nothing. We're basically at a blank slate. Now that slate is deteriorating because we keep on not trying. But I mean, the hope comes from knowing there are so many solutions that we could enact that would make a difference. And we know that they'd make a difference because certain cities have done it, certain localities have done it, certain states, other countries. And it's not to say that every result of every policy ever studied will just pick up and perfectly map itself onto the United States. But what we've learned is that there are some relationships that policy has with the outcomes they're targeting. And if we can move the needle even a little bit, we've made an incredible difference in people's lives and in the economy. So great policy we don't have, universal paid sick days. Great policy we don't have, free childcare. Great policy we don't have, paid family leave and paid medical leave. Great policy we don't have, universal school lunch and breakfast free for everyone. Great policy we don't have, universal aftercare, free for everyone, available till 6. Great policy we don't have, universal and free summer camp. All of these things have policy options. There's ideas that we could put into practice. There are things that we could try. This is what gives me hope. I mean, I'm walking into this meeting with a binder 6 inches thick called Good Ideas with data behind them. And I'm just I'm ready to do my good girl thing and be okay, In Chapter 1, Section 2 on school lunch, we have found it is one of the most cost-effective ways to buy higher test scores amongst low-income children, middle-income children, and even higher-income children. We have the cheapest way to increase America's test scores amongst children right in front of us, and wouldn't you know it doesn't cost that much. Okay, fighting obesity is just a side effect. Let's turn to Chapter 2. Like, I am ready. I've got my, book. I'm ready. And I think America should be ready too, because we're so tired of what we have now. So yeah, the current administration doesn't inspire much in terms of constructive policy solutions that are grounded in evidence as opposed to pettiness or power and retribution. But that just means those problems are going to be waiting for us, and those solutions are going to be just as necessary as they were today, as they were a month ago, as they were 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
I'm a bit of a Leslie Knope for you Parks and Rec fans. I've got my binders of policies. I'm ready to go into the media and flip through them. I have shades of Leslie in my personality.
I mean, I've been with the organization now to almost 12 years. And that's really what keeps me going. Because I'm like, guys, we have the stuff. We have a whole agenda. We have a whole publication called Big Ideas that are not really that big, but it's if you want to frame them that way, I mean, they will have a big impact. And so to your point, yeah, the solutions are there. The solutions are there. We just need to open our eyes. And to your point that you made earlier, people need to just be fed up with what the situation is right now, and not just barring this administration. Just we've seen it, right? For decades. We've known the answer. I'm a huge West Wing fan. And so we've known what the solutions are for a while.
You asked me earlier about, what it's been like being on social media and taking this more public turn away from kind of classical research economics life. And I think one thing that has never ceased to surprise me is the number of people who don't know what you and I know. If I say free school lunch is going to help with nutrition, but it really helps with test scores because, hunger isn't an annual target. You've got to hit hunger in children 3 to 4 times a day. And the more hungry a kid is, the worse they are behaved and the worse they do in school. So, I mean, this is a very obvious problem that has a very clear solution. And you tell people that school lunch increases test scores. And I had one woman DM me and she just said, I can't believe that's true. How have we not done it? And I was like, well, remember that there might be a parent in there that doesn't work when they could, and therefore no one should get school lunch. This is a tipping point argument of how much people would prefer to punish parents they don't like, even at the expense of investing in children. And so I have ended up having many conversations with people who are almost upset to learn how strong the data and evidence are in favor of certain policies.
Absolutely. And again, in the nature of our work too, is the connectivity of it all. We work on all issues impacting kids, from maternal health all the way to young adults and families. And so it really ranges the gamut. But I think it's hard sometimes. People are used to looking at things in silos, that it's hard to make the connection between even immigration and school outcome, right? And something as stark as that, where you might not be able to see the connection, but there is a connection.
There is a connection. And I've also loved having people trust me enough to share their own stories. That if I go on TikTok and I'll say, here's why universal school lunch, free, there is such a thing as a free lunch for children. The number of people that will respond with their own stories of having school lunch debt, of growing up in a household where their parents would take their lunch out of their backpack if they talked back and told them, to come back for dinner. Parents who used food as punishment or a reward. Kids who were bullied because they had a different colored ticket, meaning that they were poor, and everyone at lunch knew it because they had the poor person's ticket. And it's remarkable to the number of just how much this conversation comes back with people sharing their own stories and feeling validated in knowing that the thing that they experienced was fixable. And they like to hear that it was fixable. Jesus, the number of people who wrote, especially on school lunch, the number of people were like, Jesus, give them food. Do we even need to have evidence for this? And I was like, some people do. but they, they're like, God, I was hungry all the time. Just give them more food. They can take my food. I don't care. It's lovely to have this conversation where people rally around something, in part because of their own experience, in part because of the data they learn, and in part because of the change that's possible. And that can just be really delightful. That whole conversation around all of that.
I can see that. All right, so we're up at our last question. We ask all our guests, and I know you're going to have a good one, a song to add to our playlist. What keeps you motivated when you see a headline and you're just feeling demoralized?
I'm so glad you asked. I have about 5 songs to give you. Okay. We'll start with one. Depends on how in my feelings I am. So I certainly think that there are 2 Saturns. There's one by Stevie Wonder and there's one by SZA. And they are actually kind of beautiful complements to each other. And they're about a better world, one that we're either striving for or mourning. And so I think being better on Saturn, there's something really nice about that, even though they're both songs of loss. When I'm feeling really sassy, I will read the news while listening to Chappell Roan's My Kink is Karma. And there's a line in the song where she says, "It's comical, the bridges you burn." And the song is about an ex who's basically a flailing disaster. And my kink is karma. Like, she's just basically reveling in how much they're spiraling. And yeah, I mean, you're reading the news about, like, we're making the State Department buy cyber trucks. And there's something about it like, man, you aren't even trying to do a good job. And there's this, I can hear it in my head. It's comical, the bridges you burn.
I love it. I don't even have anything else. This was perfect.
I'm so bad. I mean, none of us can afford the rights to Chappell Roan, so I mean, we don't get to do that for the outro.
But it will be on the playlist forever.
Yeah, yes. I love hearing about the playlist.
Kathryn, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Whew, that was a ride. And if you're still with me, thank you. These are the kind of conversations that shift something, that make other things click. This system wasn't built with every family in mind, but it can be rebuilt together. If you felt that too, share the episode, text it to somebody, post it, talk about it. That's how the work spreads. Also, if it hasn't clicked for you yet, you have to follow Kathryn. Find her on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube with her handle KEDS_economist. I'm Masela Chabibi, reminding you that an ambassador for kids doesn't mean knowing all the answers. It just means refusing to accept a world where kids get less than what they need to thrive. Speaking of Kids is my first focus on children. It's produced by Windhaven Productions and Blue Jay Atlantic. Elizabeth Wyndham is our supervising producer, Julia Wyndham is our editor, and Jay Woodward is our senior producer. For more about this episode, visit firstfocus.org.